FlutterFlow isn't built for me because I already know how to code. But actually more than half of the FlutterFlow users are professional software engineers. So when I ask them Flow, they say that building in this user interface actually helps them create UI faster. And they don't have to worry about boilerplate code. So FlutterFlow takes care of things like routing management or connecting to your backend really easily. And of course, you're not giving up ownership of your ability to write code if you want to, or export and download that code if you no longer want to use the platform. So last month, we had our FlutterFlow Developer Conference in New York. And I have a couple of stats to share from that. We now have, I think this is actually too low, we now have over 1.7 or 1.8 million FlutterFlow users. Like I said, more than half of them are software developers, many of whom have direct Flutter and Dart experience. And just in this past year, more than 15,000 apps have been deployed to the app stores from FlutterFlow. And what's really cool is that FlutterFlow is also used at some really big, Wendy's, which is a popular food chain, is using FlutterFlow to build apps to streamline AI drive-through experiences. And in India, one of the largest banks, Axis Bank, has built their consumer-facing mobile app using FlutterFlow. So this has more than 50 million downloads with over 13 million monthly active users. So lots of people are building complex and large apps with FlutterFlow. Basically a function that's going to respond to a certain event. And this event can be a system event, like some data has reloaded, or it can be a user event, like a gesture. So most of the new actions we added had to do with gesture. So like on horizontal drag or on pan, so you can create cool effects when you zoom or drag on the screen. So in this screenshot here, I created an action that's going to respond to a horizontal drag update from a user. And in response, it will change the page state variable that I have that's like. And the code that FlutterFlow generates, which of course you always have access to download and export, should look like what you would write if you were writing Flutter or Dart code by hand. So we would simply see a gesture detector with this on horizontal drag update callback. And in this case, I'm simply updating my width variable with this global position that was accessible inside FlutterFlow. So that was new action triggers that had to do with gestures, but one thing we are also working on is the ability to easily add shortcuts in your app. So while a lot of FlutterFlow users create mobile apps, many also create web and desktop apps because it uses Flutter, so we can deploy to all those platforms. So being able to easily just record the shortcuts and then respond to a shortcut press from your user in your web app unlocks all kinds of great interaction opportunities. And maybe some of you have heard the name G. Skinner. We partnered with them closely when I worked on the Flutter team at Google, and now we're partnering with them at FlutterFlow. So they've built a collection. Let me just skip ahead. So if I look at the generated code, like I was mentioning before, when you create a component, it's just a widget class. So in this case, I have my rectangular tile widget entire component, and you can see that it now has a parameter that's simply a function. So again, it should look pretty similar like what you would write if writing Flutter and Dart code by hand. Okay, so that was a little bit about components and widget builders. One other feature we recently added was development environments. So when you're building an app, you might want to have a database specific to dev or testing or staging because you want to protect your production data. You don't want to mess with it as you're going and adding and testing new features. What I allowed you to do is create different environments in the FlutterFlow platform. Over on the left-hand side, I know it's a little blurry, but you can create different. And then I can create specific values. See a visual representation of what's changed in my app before or after. So I'm at the code trying to figure out what's changed. I can easily switch between previous and current to see the different color that I used. Great. A component or already seen some platforms begin to create SDKs by just simply creating a that either wraps their API endpoints. I mentioned that in FlutterFlow you have create custom code. You might want to create a Dart function or a Flutter Copilot, or this also works, the AI tool, what sort of functionality or UI you want to see incorporated. So you can imagine clicking a button and saying, this button should redirect my user to XXX page, and the AI will set up that workflow for you. So here's an example of sketch to component. You can see I can click here, and I have some drawing tools in the app, or I can upload it. I'm saying I click the stars, and I invested in the success of the Flutter community. So earlier this year, FlutterFlow pledged